It was a fine winter's day, although, as winter goes, November was drawing to a close, marking the smooth transition from the golden autumn leaves to the cold and frosty temperatures. The frosty morning of that fateful day greeted Derek with bright rays of sunshine and a sparkling blanket of white snow. He, incidentally, had come to the village for a short visit with his grandparents during the holidays before his internship at the university. And imagine his surprise at seeing such a dramatic change in the scenery outside the window. After all, just 2 days ago, he had seen only slush, yellow-brown leaves drowning in murky puddles, and the facades of the local huts blackened by moisture. Now he sat at the table in the cozy kitchenette, eating another hot pie and contemplating the fairy tale expanse of the snow-covered forest. The old couple were quietly chatting and busying themselves around the house. Derek was mesmerized by the views, which made chewing the delicious food his grandmother had prepared take twice as long as usual. The old woman, approaching the window, brought him out of his trance, sighed heavily, and nervously clutched a colorful towel to her chest, as if apprehensive. This reaction didn't go unnoticed, so Derek gently asked, "Granny, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Look how beautiful it is. It's freezing, and you're sad." Derek was a good 30 centimeters taller than his grandmother, so she, in turn, rested her head lightly on his chest and clicked her tongue. "Oh, Derek, what a nasty winter this year. Early. Early? Well, not quite. It's almost December. Time for some snow, right?" "That's true. But in our area, people are wary of such things. These fears have been instilled in us since time immemorial, from childhood. My mother and grandmother, when they were alive, used to tell me about these terrible things." "What terrible things?" Derek was surprised, instinctively pulling a stool closer, awaiting the outcome. His grandmother groaned softly and began fiddling with her towel even more restlessly. "Our village, Derek, was originally built incorrectly, not in a Christian manner. There's been a small cemetery on its site where they buried all sorts of sorcerers and those associated with evil spirits. Inhumans, in a word. They buried the dead without crosses or headstones, simply buried them anonymously so that they wouldn't be searched for, called for, or mentioned. And so, towards the Second World War, villages began to be resettled to specific sectors for the purpose of collective farming. As you can imagine, our settlement wasn't spared this fate either, and it was rebuilt right on this cemetery. Of course, there were complaints that this land wasn't fit to live and work, but the authorities simply brushed it off. So work was abandoned, and then the first misfortunes began. At first, these were simple incidents that could be chalked up to coincidences. Then the cattle started dying, horses dropping dead, and cows wasting away in the barn. They began to suspect they weren't being fed the right food. However, even the strongest animals weakened and died. That's when people remembered that ill-fated cemetery again. They began to strike en masse against the work. However, very soon, popular discontent gave way to fear after the disappearance of the first person, and then the second and third. They all simply left and never returned. After several such incidents, no one doubted that they shouldn't have built houses on this cursed place. We'd awakened something ancient, something terrible and incomprehensible, something that guards these black souls lying in the ground, and over time, people noticed that during early winter, it's especially hungry and ferocious, so they try to lock themselves in their houses until dusk, By the way, your grandfather also once—" But then the grandfather himself suddenly intervened in the conversation. "Susan, stop it! You've already driven me crazy with your tales, and now Derek, too. Do you believe them? I've lived here for years, and nothing's happened. Don't scare my grandson for no reason." "I'm not afraid, Grandpa." Derek tried to diffuse the conversation. "That's right, Derek. I've never believed such nonsense, and I advise you not to either. Better get going while the weather's nice. No time to mope around at home." With these words, the grandfather approached the table, picked up a plate with a half-eaten pie, popped the remaining piece into his mouth, and began busily washing the dishes, breathing heavily. The grandmother sat quietly on a stool, shaking her head. The tense atmosphere clearly didn't lend itself to further dialogue, so Derek hastily retreated. "Yes, I guess I'll go for a walk. Call me if anything." The grandfather, without turning his head, hooted from the depths of the kitchen, and the grandmother only looked pleadingly at her grandson, hurriedly pulling on his jacket. The boy caught that anxious look, but quickly looked away and walked out into the street with a more casual air. Slamming the door, Derek decided to get out of the yard as quickly as possible. He hid his hands in his pockets, unlocked the gate, and walked along the snow-covered road to the end of the village. He was not tempted to walk under the windows of curious villagers, and he had no acquaintances or friends here. Reflecting on everything that had happened earlier, he unknowingly turned onto a similarly snowy path toward the forest. Derek wandered mindlessly. Neither the beautiful landscapes nor the bright sun interested him anymore. Over and over in his mind, he replayed terrifying images of frozen skeletons in rotten, damp robes lying beneath their house, and of unknown evil spirits roaming the woods, abducting and devouring people. The boy was pulled from these thoughts by the realization that he himself had wandered quite deep into the forest. Derek looked around. Around him towered the slender whitened trunks of pine trees surrounded by bushes dusted with snow, and behind him, where his tracks had led, village houses loomed like black dots among the web of branches. After standing there for a while, the boy was about to head back, but something caught his attention. It was hard to spot among the sparkling snow, but hanging from one of the trees was a large metal basin, or rather a trough, the kind used to bathe village children. Derek grunted in surprise. The find clearly surprised him. It's not often you see hanging troughs hanging from trees, especially one so strategically positioned like a target. The boy took a couple of steps back and scooped up some snow. Although it was loose, Derek managed to form a ball. He swung and threw. The snowball landed right on target, leaving a white, round mark on the bottom of the trough. This throw greatly inspired the boy, and he hurried to mold another projectile. He missed several times, but continued enthusiastically shooting at the tin tub, varying his throwing angles and distances. As he did so, the previous excitement vanished, giving way to childish excitement. Derek threw another snowball, and then the trough wobbled, landed with a heavy thud, and fell into a snowdrift. And what it was hanging on frightened Derek for the first few seconds. After all, there was a growth visible on the pine tree which the boy initially mistook for a real animal skull. However, it was merely a bizarrely shaped piece of tree bark, fused by circumstance into the shape of an elk's head. Derek walked around the astonishing discovery. Indeed, part of the tree stared back at him like a hornless animal mask. For a second, the boy even felt a little offended that the locals were using such an interesting object as a hanger. What if I rip it off the trunk and take it home? I think no one would remain indifferent, flashed through the boy's mind. The young man picked up the trough that had fallen a minute earlier, turned it over, and secured it in a snowdrift at the base of the trunk. But as he climbed onto it, he realized he couldn't reach the desired object. After rummaging around in the snow for another minute, Derek found a stick of the right length and began carefully prodding the head from underneath. The frozen bark resisted, creaking dully, but not cracking. Derek really didn't want to damage this miracle of nature. And then suddenly, something inside his head crunched, and the end of the stick sank deep into the hole in the trunk, causing the boy to lose his footing and fall flat on his stomach in the snow. The dropped stick fell nearby, and a meter away lay the treasured tree skull. Derek immediately shook himself, picked up his head, and began examining it from all sides. He squinted and held it up toward the sun, allowing the bright yellow lighting to shine through the eye sockets. And then something suddenly closed the two glowing chasms. The boy jerked in fright, and the moose head, dropped from his hands, fell vertically into the snow. Derek, having stumbled, found himself back in the snowdrift. He quickly looked up at the eerie object, secretly hoping he was imagining things, but he froze with a grimace of horror on his face. For real, human eyes were spinning in the two holes. The reddened, small balls frantically searched for the one who had disturbed their peace. The boy froze, trying to hold his breath and show no signs of life. During those seconds, which seemed endless to him, Derek tried to understand what was happening, but his rational mind refused to comprehend it. Meanwhile, the two pupils slowly turned in his direction and narrowed predatorily, like the 2 points of a sniper rifle's sights that had already chosen its prey and would never let it go. The boy screamed hysterically and began to crawl away on his elbows, trying not to take his eyes off the revived head for a second. But it continued to stare at him, literally burning him with its gaze. At some point, Derek realized that the devilish face was looking somewhere through him. He didn't have time to consider where her gaze might be directed because, at that moment, the back of his head hit something soft. The young man looked up and was immediately overcome by a new wave of horror. Some enormous shaggy creature was looking down at him. The creature had no head, but that wasn't necessary. The boy knew for sure the monster could see him. The creature lunged with the agility of a lynx, leapt aside, and rose to its feet. Its 3-meter-long humanoid body was completely covered in long, matted black-brown fur like that of a wild yak. Its body, like a fishing net, was entwined with ropes, with human bones tied to them, and 2 gigantic elk antlers were piled on its shoulders. The terrifying creature, rattling its bone epaulets, began to approach the terrified Derek like an atomic ice drift. The boy jumped to his feet and ran toward the village. Driven only by the desire to leave this damned place, he saw nothing in front of him. He also didn't see how the foul-smelling creature lifted its head from the snowdrift and placed it between its shoulders. The previously wooden lines of the skull began to take on a rather lifelike quality, flowing and fusing with the black flesh. And then, behind the fleeing Derek, a scream echoed, a sound he would never forget, the howl of 1,000 angry souls, as if coming from the very depths of hell. The boy flew through the forest weeds, raising a dusting of snow, falling and stumbling, but the saving village didn't get a centimeter closer. No matter how hard Derek tried, no matter how fast he ran, the horizon mockingly stood still. At some point, his consciousness, exhausted by primal terror, began to leave his weakened body, but the boy stubbornly refused to give in. Despite the chaos, he desperately clung to the saving thread of hope. His strength was almost gone. He was finding it difficult to breathe, and his vision was clouded by tears that instantly froze. Then, a log buried deep in the snow caused the boy to lose his balance and fall face first into the scorching snowdrift again. His red cheeks, soaked with tears and sweat, felt as if they were on fire. His body went limp, and his arms and legs stretched limply to the sides. Derek couldn't feel his fingers. He tried to rub his hands and rise, but something prevented him from doing so. His limbs didn't obey him, nor did he feel their contact with one another. Derek was seriously frightened and decided to shake the snow off his hands. And at that moment, his eyes bulged, and his mouth let out a weak, strangled breath. Instead of his usual palms and fingers, his forearms were covered in hairy hooves. Derek touched his face in horror. Coarse hairs had also appeared on his cheeks. The boy jumped to his feet in fear, but immediately fell to his knees and doubled over from the terrible pain in his lower back and chest. His body transformed before his eyes. His feet, breaking through his boots, revealed themselves as equally black hooves. His balloon jacket split along the seam along his spine, revealing an ugly beige hump covered in coarse, straw-like fur. His rib cage slumped forward, pulling his shoulder blades and collarbones with it with a sickening crunch. His arms and legs were also deformed, forming an extra joint and bending at an unnatural angle. Derek still tried to scream, but his cries were interrupted by groans and heavy sighs. The boy's neck sagged forward. Huge, heavy horns were forming on the top of his head at an incredible speed. He tried to rise again. This time, the new, elongated limbs allowed him to confidently stand on all fours. The still flickering consciousness in his head gradually faded, and with it, all humanity. In the last seconds of sanity, the creature that had once been Dima raised its head and let out a scream that within seconds grew into the guttural howl of a wild animal. The red-blue lights of police cars glided over the snow-covered trunks. Uniformed men scurried among the pine trees in the morning twilight, casting long shadows. There was a hubbub and a commotion. A crowd of village onlookers was chattering loudly. They were periodically dispersed with rehearsed phrases like, "Don't interfere," "Get out of the way," and "You're interfering with the investigation." On an oilcloth spread out in the snow, torn jeans and a jacket, a striped hat, boots, and a bent tin tub were laid out. Susan and Jonathan immediately recognized their grandson's belongings. They, along with the boy's parents, who had arrived, were interrogated far from the raging crowd. The grandmother kept adjusting the blanket draped over her shoulders, breaking into drawn-out, hysterical moans into her handkerchief. The mother and father, meanwhile, sat absent-mindedly on the bumper of a police Ford, smoking cigarettes one after another. And only grandfather stood alone, far away from everyone, clutching his last gray hairs in his hands. "You said he was finished?" The sudden voice of his elderly wife made him turn around. I thought so too, but... What kind of but could there be? Our grandson died because of you." Susan's scream quickly turned to a squeak. "Darling, who could have known? You! You! You knew all this. You knew, and you kept silent. 10 years ago, we sacrificed dozens of our men to drive him back to where he came from. And now our village once again stands on the brink of life and death. Why didn't you tell us all? I was trying to protect you. Seriously, with a leaky tin can? Are you out of your mind? This creature can't be hidden. It can't be contained. What were you counting on? There's not a single person left in our village who could stand up to this creature. We've all grown old, and the young ones have gone to the cities. And this creature has been wandering the world for centuries, and only the devil knows how long it will last. It's wiped out half our population, turned them into who knows what. Do you want us to die out completely? I really didn't want to endanger our village. People used to coexist with it somehow. Grandma indifferently wiped a hot drop from her cheek, the wet trace immediately dried by the piercing wind. She turned and walked toward the ford. Grandpa didn't have time to respond, and didn't want to. He turned away silently, tears slowly streaming from his eyes. Every word his wife said echoed in his brain like a pulsing, echoing, ringing. Why was he silent about everything? Why didn't he warn him? He was actually afraid. Afraid of what he'd experienced 10 years ago. Afraid of that uncontrollable panic. Afraid that this time they wouldn't be able to cope with this immortal monster. He'd personally chopped off its head and burned it at the stake that fateful night. But exactly a month ago, the old man went hunting and realized that that battle had not destroyed the ancient creature of horror. It had not died. This creature waited, gathering strength, growing a new head, and having taken possession of the tree, it absorbed the juices of the cursed earth so that one day it might rise again from the dust. But Jonathan Smith hid this. He hid everything. He hid his return to our world. He hid the truth from those closest to him. He believed that ignorance was bliss, but he was sorely mistaken, and this mistake cost him dearly. Dimka found that head and awakened the ancient evil. Will the old man be able to forgive himself for this now? That was the question throbbing in his head. But the only answer was a distant howl carried on the wind, the howl of some strange wild animal.